Hi there, this video is about Letty Lynton. Letty Lynton? The Little Scene 1932 film starring Joan Crawford, most famous for making a splash with a dress that took the fashion world by storm and then completely disappearing. I'm going to tell you more about why that happened and what this film is about. First of all, the plot. So because it's almost impossible to find this film, I'm going to tell you the plot of the film. So you might want to skip forward a little bit if you don't want it spoiled for you, but it's a fairly simple plot anyway. So Letty Lynton, as I mentioned, she's played by Joan Crawford, is a wealthy New York socialite who returns home from Uruguay, fleeing a failed love affair with Emile Renault, played by Nils Asher. Asher? She's hoping to start over, but he's not so keen to let her get away. While on the ship home, she meets a lovely, honest man, Jerry, played by Robert Montgomery, and the two fall in love. He proposes and she accepts. It seems like she might be able to turn her life around and start over. But when the ship docks, Letty finds that Emile has taken a plane to beat her to her home city and is waiting for her. Afraid that Jerry will reject her if he finds out about Emile, and afraid of a public scandal, she gives them both the slip and returns home. Her home is a mansion, but it's a cold welcome. We learn that her mother was betrayed and hurt by her philandering father, and in response has lost all faith in humanity and shows love to no one, not even her daughter. Jerry is eager to have Letty meet his parents, but Emile turns up at her home and threatens to show Jerry their love letters and ruin her chance at a better life. She agrees to meet Emile at his hotel and tries to get him to give her the letters, but he tells her in no uncertain terms that he will never let her go and blackmails her into staying with him. She's brought poison with her in order to kill herself, and in despair she puts it in her own drink. But Emile isn't looking, so he turns around, grabs her glass, and drinks the poison. So Letty didn't plan to kill him, but at this point she makes it very clear that she's happy that he's dead. Then she flees the scene, and life seems to go on as usual, but the detectives soon come calling. When they come to question her, because she's known to have been at the apartment that night, she's afraid she's about to lose everything and is ashamed that Jerry is now going to find out about her, the truth about her. But he surprises her by coming up with an alibi for her, claiming that she was with him after being at Emile's and that he knew all about the letters. Then her mother surprises her as well by corroborating the story, meaning that the case against her is really circumstantial and gets dropped. Letty has a second chance of life. The end. So the idea for this film came from the novel of the same name by Marie Adelaide Lowndes, and that came out in 1931. But that was based on the famous Madeline Smith murder case. That was a huge case, one of the most sensational of the 19th century, when in 1857 in Scotland, Pierre-Emile Langelier? Oh my gosh, that's probably not how that's pronounced. I do apologize. Was allegedly murdered by Smith. So she was born in 1835 to a well-to-do Glasgow family. Her father was an architect, and Emile was a clerk of a much lower social status and 10 years older than 20-year-old Madeline. In 1855, a secret romantic relationship started, and the two sent each other hundreds of letters, which were quite passionate and revealing, including that she secretly met him alone and that she had lost her virginity to him and had promised to marry him. Her parents had no idea about this relationship, and they went ahead and found a suitor for their daughter in 1857. A man called William Harper Minock, who was of the same class as her. Interestingly to me, it seems that she maybe wanted to marry Minock because she asked Emile to give her back her letters, which she could have maybe tried to elope with him or continue the relationship in some way or something like that, but she didn't. So I found that interesting. It kind of made me wonder if maybe there'd been some sort of emotional blackmail and things leading up to this. I don't know, speculation on my part. But anyway, she asked for her letters back, and instead he threatened to force her to marry him by blackmail, using the letters to expose her and ruin her and her family's reputation. So in the early hours of March 23rd, 1857, he died by arsenic poisoning. The evidence pointed to Madeline Smith, who had recently been seen buying arsenic, and whose compromising letters had been found in his lodging. So she had motive, means, and opportunity, and she was arrested for the murder, which was huge news. A girl from a good family being involved in a salacious crime and a relationship that was scandalous, involving both premarital sex, and many love letters between people of very different class backgrounds. It just captured the public imagination. I think as well, the idea at the time was sort of that women didn't murder people. So that was kind of a bit shocking as well. And also the notion that she was sort of this innocent girl seduced by a more experienced, dishonest man from a lower class trying to entrap and blackmail her, presumably for social and monetary gain, at least as far as the story went. Obviously, that's kind of alleged. Due to the envelopes of the letters and the dates on them sort of being mixed up and disorganized, it became unclear, or at least arguable, that the two maybe hadn't seen each other on the day of the death, and that kind of thing. So the defense was able to argue that Langelier could have killed himself in despair over their relationship ending, and that could have happened weeks earlier. So in the end, the verdict ended up being returned as not proven, which, if you haven't heard of that before, that's a Scottish legal outcome, meaning that the accused is not proven guilty, but they're not completely cleared of suspicion either. Basically, the prosecution had failed to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt, but it didn't really save Madeline. The damage was done. She and her family had to leave town, and her father died quite young at 55, his health just ruined by the scandal. But for her, she went on to marry twice, including a late in life marriage to a man 25 years younger than her, after she moved to the US when she was 75. So she was kind of an interesting person, all in all. She died a few years before this film came out in 1928, so not that long before. And the case has been compared to the Lizzie Borden case, in that there's been much speculation over the years as to whether she was actually innocent or guilty. Letty Lynton is not the only film or media based on the case, with varying levels of accuracy depending on, on the medium and whatever. So in literature, Wilkie Collins' The Law and the Lady in 1875, The House in Queen Anne's Square in 1920, Lovers All Untrue in 1970, and Murder in Paradise in 2008 are some samples that took inspiration. In theatre, we had 1944's The Rest is Silence, in radio, an episode of The Black Museum in 52, and Lady Killers with Lucy Worsley in 2022. There's been TV specials, and she had a wax figure in the Edinburgh Wax Museum in the 70s and 80s. So basically, it's a case that in every generation, there's some kind of interest where this case has come up again and again. And finally, in film, David Lane's Madeline in 1950 and Dishonored Lady with Hedy Lamarr in 1947, which brings me to the reason that you have not seen this film. So there was a court case. The case made against this film is significant for copyright law in cinema and the complexities of film adaptations. What happened was this. Letty Lynton came out in 1932, but in 1936, playwrights Edward Sheldon and Margaret Eyre Barnes sued, claiming that the film plagiarized their play, Dishonored Lady, from 1930. While Letty Lynton was based on the novel, as mentioned above, they claimed that the plotting, characters, and some dialogue in the film was so close to their play, and they did not get credit or rights or anything like that. So in 1936, Federal District Court ruled that MGM had infringed on the copyright of their play, and MGM appealed the decision. So in 1939, the Second Court of Appeals upheld that ruling, and they ordered MGM to pay 1/5 of the net profits to Sheldon and Barnes, which was interesting because it mirrored the way profits are divided in patent infringement cases. So it kind of linked those two in a way. Well, not linked them, but as a sort of precedent. So some kind of say that this is the first copyright decision to kind of follow this basis in patent suits. So that's, kind of makes it interesting. But a similar decision was made in the 1921 case against Al Jolson's 1920 song Avalon by none other than Puccini, interestingly enough. I don't know, for me, I was like, that's a song, not a movie. So I guess this is kind of important because it's taking that 1/5 rule and applying it to movie copyright, and also just making filmmakers and studios at the time like more aware that you could get sued, so sort of being more cautious or whatever. Anyway, from there, it went all the way to the Supreme Court. MGM wanted the whole thing overturned because obviously that was a precedent that they didn't want. Well, obviously they didn't want to pay as well, but that would be a dangerous sort of precedent for what they wanted to do. But the writers wanted the total profits, so they wanted it appealed as well. And then in 1940, the decision to deny them both was made and the original ruling stood. I'm telling you all that because 1940 is quite a long way from 1932 when the film came out. So it's kind of, obviously court cases are long, you know? We all knew this. What this meant was that as a result of all of this, Letty Lynton has been under permanent injunction, making it legally unavailable for screening and distribution, even almost after 100 years later, you know, today. Only bootleg copies of this film are out there, meaning that if you've seen this film, you've watched it illegally, and if you wouldn't steal a car and you wouldn't steal a handbag, you're a pirate, basically. And also, you're going to be hard-pressed to find it anywhere. I'm not going to comment on whether I watched the film or not because I am a law-abiding citizen and I always cross at the crossings and I look both ways. I follow all the rules. But I do kind of think it would be interesting to see if this forgotten film will become available at some point soon, since I figure the copyright on the play of 1930 must be almost up. I'm actually not 100% sure. I think it's something like 70 years or something. You guys might know, actually. But in the end, to come full circle, 1947, they made Dishonored Lady, the film adaptation of the play. And probably like a little bit of a middle finger from United Artists to MGM. Yeah, and that was directed by Robert Stevenson, who you may remember we talked about recently because he directed the Love Bug movie. So the court case and its being a lost film are part of what makes this film famous, but the other reason is the diaphanous beauty that is the Letty Lynton dress by costume designer Adrian. This stunning design appears being worn by our titular character in the romantic scenes on the boat. The dress is white, floor-length, organdy, I'm pretty sure, with huge ruffled sleeves, like these big layers of ruffles on their sleeve. It's stunning. And it also has interesting ruffled detailed bodice design that gives a slightly dropped waist kind of a style to it. And the dress floats and moves beautifully. It's stunning. It's incredibly feminine and romantic. And on the tall sort of column-like figure of Joan Crawford, she has this kind of, she's got a very straight kind of build. And on black and white film, the dress just glows. It's a genuine wonder. I love it. And I'm not the only one. The dress is considered one of the most iconic and influential sort of fashion iconic dresses of the 30s, which is pretty impressive because the film had a limited run in cinemas, but the dress was just a huge sensation. Macy's in New York has claimed to have sold 50,000 dresses that were copies of it within 1 month alone, and dresses inspired by it were a huge trend, and they were named after this film, so sometimes you'll see it come up, somebody be like, oh, it's a Letty Lynton dress. It was not just a beautiful dress, it also shifted the trend of fashion from the more sort of androgynous style of the 20s flapper era, which Joan Crawford had been very successful in playing a flapper. And you also kind of saw clinging simple lines of satin, bias cut slinky dresses, that kind of thing as well. So this had a more feminine, ruffly, dramatic outline with a sort of bold shape and that long hem length. Yeah, I mean, I just mentioned here, it's often talked about the economic forces linked to women's hemlines. You might have heard that before. I feel like that's kind of been said a lot, so I'm not really going to go into that here. But yeah, some estimates state that over 1 million Letty Lynton dresses were sold in America at this time. So the designer of this dress was a costume designer known professionally simply as Adrian. So he's one of my favorite costume designers, though I have a few. He made the costumes for The Wizard of Oz, The Women, and many other films. He was born in Connecticut in 1903, and sometimes he went by Gilbert Adrian, but his real name was Adrian Greenberg. He studied at New York School of Fine and Applied Arts, which is now called Parsons. You may know of that one. And he began in New York designing for Broadway before being lured to Hollywood by Natasha Rambova, who was the wife of Valentino, and that was in 1924, to work on Hooded Falcon. In 28, he was taken on by MGM, and he became head designer there for 13 years, 200 films. His work was highly influential in creation of the Hollywood sort of look of the era, and obviously that influenced the wider world of fashion as well. And then in the 40s, he left MGM and opened his own fashion house in Beverly Hills, but his health had started to suffer, and he declined a little bit, and he died fairly young in 1959. He was only 56. So Adrian was married to actress Janet Gaynor in what was called at the time a lavender marriage. He was well known to be gay, like amongst his friends and his peers and stuff. Maybe not openly, like today we would say openly, publicly. But the marriage meant that he and his wife's sexuality was hidden from the public or from sort of moralistic organizations behind a conventional marriage, basically. So lavender marriages were arrangements that sometimes the studio themselves might set up to avoid issues with the law or, that kind of thing. Religious groups, political groups, that kind of thing. Sometimes these relationships were very warm and loving as well. And so these two remained married their whole lives, and they had a child together. So, it was just interesting. So this film stars Joan Crawford, most notably. She plays Letty Lynton, so she may be a familiar name to you if you watched the 2017 TV series Feud, or know her work in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, or the excellent Mildred Pierce, for which she won an Academy Award. She's a very well-known face of Hollywood's golden age, and she's also well known for her work ethic and determination, managing to have a very long-running career in a time that was kind of especially obsessed with female youthfulness, shall we say. A lot of actresses had a shelf life in this time period. So she was born Lucille Fay LeSueur in either 1904 or 1906 in Texas. We don't know which year because she lied about her age so much. She grew up in a tumultuous home. Her father abandoned the family, and she started working as a dancer and chorus girl and was signed to MGM in 1925. And when she wasn't really happy with her profile in these films, she created her own publicity and was kind of nationally known as sort of a flapper girl, a symbol of that era and that kind of youthful fashion and stuff. So in movies, she often played rags to riches type roles, hardworking women, and she successfully transitioned from silent to sound films, which a lot of actors didn't. By the late 30s, she was one of the most famous and highly paid actresses at her studio, but she was also one of the women accused of being box office poison, which I made a video about that, so I'm going to link that below if you're curious about knowing more about that story, because if I go into it here, it'll be a very long video. So at the age when a lot of female actresses found themselves out on their ear, at 41, she made her first comeback with Mildred Pierce, winning an Oscar for that role. And then later again, she reinvigorated her career in 1962 with the infamous Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, which was hugely popular and spawned a lot of horror, like films that were inspired by this that would have like an aging female actress from this kind of time period. So yeah, she continued to work into the 1970s. She was married 4 times, one of which was to Pepsi president Alfred Steele in the 50s. And after his death, she was on the board of that company for quite a while. So she was kind of a powerhouse, quite the businesswoman, fashion icon, but her reputation was largely tainted by the tell-all memoir by her daughter Christina called Mommy Dearest, which was a huge sensation and bestseller, and was adapted into an amazingly camp film starring Faye Dunaway. So if you haven't read that book or seen that movie, I actually kind of recommend both. They are kind of camp, so obviously you got to make up your mind if that's something that you enjoy. It detailed the hidden character of Crawford as cruel and dark and an abusive mother to her adopted children, though not everyone agreed with Christina's version of events. It's been claimed that Crawford adopted some of her children from the now infamous Georgia Tan, which is a whole true crime story, probably for another time, involving human trafficking and stealing children. So there's a lot of really good podcasts and videos on Georgia Tan. So if you're into that kind of thing and you haven't heard about her before, you might want to kind of look her up. But yeah, basically she was the daughter of a judge and managed to steal children in order to make money off adopting them. And a lot of bad things happened around that. And a lot of Hollywood stars like Crawford adopted some of these children, not knowing that they were sort of stolen or whatever. Although interestingly, Crawford actually adopted 5 children, according to one source that I found. And then the mother apparently turned up and claimed the child back. So I kind of wonder if that's linked to Georgia Tan, but I couldn't find a lot of information about her and Georgia Tan specifically. So I kind of didn't want to go into that too much. But either way, Joan Crawford remains a fascinating figure in cinema history. So Robert Montgomery plays the romantic lead Jerry, and he also had a significant career in Hollywood. He was born into a well-off family in New York in 1904. He started acting in the mid-20s and debuted in 29 in So This Is College. What a great name for a movie. At first he played roles like this one, the handsome leading man in romances and romantic comedies. He starred in a lot of successful films, including Here Comes Mr. Jordan and Night Must Fall, for which he won an Oscar. After serving in World War II, he kind of shifted a little bit and started working as a director and producer, including making Lady in the Lake in 1947, which used an unusual first-person camera perspective. It wasn't a hugely popular film, but it is one to kind of check out, especially if you like film noir and like that kind of thing, hard-boiled detective kind of stuff. Later in the 50s, he starred in the Robert Montgomery Presents anthology show on TV. And he's also the father of Elizabeth Montgomery, who is famous for being the star of Bewitched. And then we have Nils Astor. He plays the bad guy, Emil. So he was a Swedish actor, and he started out in silent films. He was born in 1897 in Copenhagen, which you'll know is in Denmark, but he was raised in Sweden by Swedish parents, so he's Swedish, okay? He was known as the male Greta Garbo, and he actually starred with her in some silent films, and he was known as one of her sailors, which was a euphemism for her gay male friends. His exotic good looks meant he was often cast in dashing romantic roles, but his thick accent meant that with the advent of talkies, or sound films, his options for roles were limited, and he was also blacklisted in the 30s for breaking contract, meaning he went and worked in the UK for a while. His English-speaking movie career kind of declined at this point, and he's not that well remembered now, other than for his role in The Bitter Tea of General Yen in 1933, which was directed by Frank Capra. That's a very sort of controversial movie. It was controversial at the time. It's controversial now for different reasons. It's kind of interesting in the sort of film history sense of things, but Ashler was married to actress Vivian Duncan in 1930, so this was another lavender marriage. But this was very much publicized. Tabloids loved the drama in this relationship. They were always fighting, and they had a baby called Evelyn, and she was dubbed the International Baby because her nationality was a matter of dispute. So she was born in Bavaria, but with a Swedish father and an American mother. And so they actually had trouble bringing this baby into the US. They had to kind of like apply for citizenship for her or something like that. But anyway, it was all very much like tabloid fodder, and the marriage itself only lasted for 2 years. So this one was directed by Clarence Brown. He's quite interesting, actually. He was born in 1890, and before becoming a director, he founded the Brown Motor Company. So he worked with cars, basically. With cars. Let's just leave that there. I'm not going to try and correct myself. Before shifting, no pun intended, into movies in 1913. So he originally worked under French director Maurice Tourneur. Oh my gosh. What is wrong with me today? I cannot pronounce people's names. Anyway, he worked with him initially, and then he joined the war effort as a fighter pilot in World War I, and then launched his career as a director sort of in his own right in the 20s. He worked with MGM quite a lot, And he was called the Star Maker because he worked so well at getting career-making performances out of actors. His films earned a whopping 38 Academy Award nominations and won 9. Though he himself actually never won an Oscar, he was nominated for Best Director 5 times, but he never actually won. Some of his best-loved films are Anna Karenina from 1935, and that won Best Foreign Film at Venice. National Velvet, personal favorite of mine, 1944, which introduced Elizabeth Taylor to audiences and kind of helped make her big. The Yearling in 46, which was one of the 6 to be nominated for an Academy Award for Best Director, and Intruder in the Dust, 1949, for which he won a British Academy Film Award. His work is celebrated for its human touch, detailed direction, and providing a platform for some of the biggest stars of the era. Yeah, I mean, that's all the background, but what about the actual film itself? Is it any good? I mean, from what I've seen of it, shall we say, the movie has its charms. So firstly, I adore the weird, lugubrious poster for this film with its like cartoonish, it's kind of got this startling face that's like a caricature of Crawford's face. I'm not sure if we're meant to be afraid of her or if she's meant to be expressing terror in this picture, but it's not a bad stylized version of her face, honestly. Like, it's kind of artistic, but I think if I was her and that was the poster they made and it was meant to be my face, I think I'd be kind of offended. But yeah, films of this era were often a bit of an escape with a fantasy of wealth or aspirational lifestyles. So in the Great Depression, people wanted a Cinderella world, or at least that's what box office takings showed. They sort of wanted to escape. And this film had a wealth of beautiful costumes, as we mentioned. And I really liked the sets in this movie as well. It has an almost nostalgic feel, evoking the bygone Gilded Age to some extent. And it's got in it sort of high ceilings, huge windows, things like that. It's quite fabulous to look at, honestly. Crawford herself is really watchable, for lack of a better word, in her beautiful dresses and her kind of statuesque figure. Her face has this almost kind of painted looking style to it, like she's kind of doll-like, which is pretty cool. She has perfect hair in this film, and in some of her scenes she's sort of really going for it, emoting her heart out and giving displays of hysteria and all that kind of thing. She's definitely the star of the show here, but that said, I don't think anyone in this movie is giving their career-defining performance. In some ways, I think if this movie hadn't gotten lost, it might have been mostly forgotten, if not for the costuming. It's not the best 1930s era film, but it's by far not the worst either. I think there's something charming about the way that Letty's mother has a change of heart over the course of the film and gives her daughter an alibi and a second chance at a happy life. It kind of gives the film a bit more heart and warmth and kind of gives it a bit of a journey, which is cool. And I liked the maid character who is devoted to Letty, which kind of lets us know in a quick storytelling way that Letty must be a good person, because she's kind of inspired that kind of devotion. So the maid is played by Louise Closser Hale, which I kind of didn't do like a little bio of her, but she's quite interesting. She's in loads of amazing films, had quite a long history, and she also wrote plays and popular novels and stuff too, so she's pretty cool as well. So while it's not in itself an amazing film, perhaps, it's certainly very intriguing. The storytelling lets us know that Letty has probably been led astray by Emil. He's probably seduced her in some way, and was perhaps able to do this because with her mother's heart being cold and the way her mother behaves towards her, she was craving and susceptible to any warmth. He's abusive in a way that would actually be quite recognizable to the modern viewer. The film doesn't judge her for having sex outside of marriage, and Jerry is honestly not bothered by it when he finds out, much to her surprise. The outlook seems to be that now that she knows better, she wants to do better. Maybe she's like a flapper girl, all grown up kind of thing. That could be implied because people would have known her from the 20s and that kind of role. On the other hand, the detective is kind of an older man from the previous era, and he seems to want to catch this woman out and kind of punish her. Like, he's very determined to get her for this crime. And then opposing him is Jerry as the new generation, accepting that, you know, this is the modern world and this stuff just doesn't matter anymore. This kind of, you know, moralizing and yeah, that kind of thing. So if this equality surprises you for the time period, then you might be new to pre-code films. After the code came out, or the Motion Picture Production Code as it's called, in 1934, or the Hays Code, you might have heard it called that, there were rules adopted as to what could be shown on screen. There are some films that really push the boundaries of what could be shown, or things could be implied in a lot of films, but some of it would be in ways that might go over your head if you were like a younger viewer or something. But in the pre-code era, things could be openly stated or shown. In this film, we have things like sex outside of marriage kind of spoken about, hinted at, almost talked about directly in some scenes, and we have a woman who gets away with murder, basically, or accidental murder, to be fair. Under the production code, characters were not allowed to profit from crime, or criminals were not allowed to be shown getting away with crimes. So this film couldn't have been made a few years later, really. I've talked more about the production code in another video, so I'll link that below as well if you want to know a little bit more about the history of it and stuff like that, because it's kind of detailed. But suffice it to say, this film kind of feels quite fresh and modern in that sense. I'm not sure if I would suggest seeing this film if it comes out of copyright. I mean, I might suggest it. I don't know if I would like recommend it as being like the most amazing film, but it is, I don't know, it's just, it might have piqued your interest. I think it's not anyone's best performance in this movie, but it's definitely really just an interesting and storied film, and it has an interesting place in cinema history, and the fashion is, and the style of the film is really fascinating. So, you know, it might be one, if you get the chance to watch it somewhere at some time, you might want to watch it, or you might just have been interested in the sort of history behind it and the story behind it. So I'd love to know if you already knew about this film. Do you have a fear of wire coat hangers? Any interesting facts I left out that you kind of want to talk about? There's always more with movies, I find. There's always things. If so, like, come find me in the comment section. Tell me things. I will catch up with you there. And I have more movies and cinema history to share with you. So if you want to be in on that and know when that comes out, please subscribe if you want to. And I will see you again soon with another little slice of cinema and cinema history. Yeah, thank you for watching and hanging out with me.